Mr. Chairman, I'd like to just clarify 2 points very quickly. Thank you.
That's called a reply.
Yeah, I don't want there to be any confusion about my argument, or one part of my argument. Mr. Tite said, oh, we heard it, we heard it, we heard it. And Mr. Oliver was flipped through the meeting minutes and said, oh, they talked about all sorts of stuff. 2 things are not in the record prior to that final public meeting. And you can look at this and you can confirm this. 1, there is no mention of the tax assessor's property card and the calculation in that card. That was something that was slipped in very, very artfully, I should say, into the draft decision. But it is not part of the record prior to that point. And once that draft decision came out, that was after the final public meeting. You can look at the minutes from the final public meeting as well. You will not see a discussion of that because it wasn't before anybody in the town. People could not comment on it. The second thing, you don't have to take my word for it because what I'm saying isn't evidence. Mr. McCoy is saying it's not evidence. What Mr. Tites is saying is definitely not evidence. He can tell you what happened in 2008 and what everybody's motivations were. That's not on the record. What I want you to look at, take a look at the first application for a zoning change. And then you can look at the second application for a zoning change. You'll see that what was before the planning board when they made the recommendation is not the same thing. And it's not the same way in an important way. It doesn't have the language of the actual change. So how could the planning board make a recommendation on something they didn't have? I just wanted to make sure.
What were the differences? What were the differences between the first application and the second application that prejudices your client? Can you identify that?
I can identify it. The actual language of the change. Okay, so you're gonna get a recommendation. You probably want to see what the change language is. Okay, but I can say all sorts of things. You have the 2 decisions in front of you. They're the 2 applications in front of you. They're not that long. You can flip through it. It's the second page, I believe, maybe it's the third, that has the narrative. See where they differ. If you think they're the same application, fine. That's good. But you have it in front of you. You can take a look at it, Mr. Oliver.
And you're talking about the second application, you're referring to the
May 23rd, 2022.
the amended, the one that Mr. McCoy was just addressing.
I take amendment and change to be synonyms, but
Okay.
yes, you're
Okay.
correct. May 23rd, 2022 is the date of the application.
And are you comparing that to
The only other one that's on the
December
record.
1?
Yes,
2021 application?
the one that the planning board had when it considered and made its recommendation. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that there was no rehearing after that amended application was made. There was no rehearing after this property card from the tax assessor came in. And under the Rhode Island law, they had to open the hearing again. They did it once, they should have done it again. That's my point.
Did you identify in your memo the differences between, for the benefit of the board, the differences between the 2?
I can do it generally.
Okay, because I didn't see it in your memo.
If you give me time, I can go back, I can run a compare right on the 2. And can
Well,
see
you seem to be
exactly.
putting a lot of weight on that argument to
No,
support your
it's a
position that it should have reopened the public hearing on the amended application.
No, the planning board should have been referred to them. It's not really necessarily reopening. But every application that comes in is supposed to be referred to the planning board. This one came in and was not. And it came in, there's no doubt, it came in on May 23rd after the decision was rendered. Okay? So, and I can characterize it all you want, but really I think the board has to take a look at it. It's the second and third page at the top of the narrative, and you'll see that it's a different application.
So in the sequence of events, what was described right before you came up was that there were decisions made that required them, based on the agreement, based on the agreement with the planning board, for them to modify the zone request for a zoning change. Is that how you would characterize it or not characterize it?
I would characterize it as, this was not something that was discussed during the public hearing, this zoning change. The language was not before either the citizens when they had public comment, nor was it before the planning board when they issued their decision. You read the decision, it doesn't have the language, it doesn't say what's going to change.
So that wouldn't have been apparent during the hearing, during the public hearing, that there was going to be a change in what was in the zoning amendment that they had proposed?
So I think this is where it comes down to in fairness. So they had an idea that there was going to be some type of zoning change, right? But what they didn't have before them is the language that was being proposed.
But they knew the parameters that were going to be requested based on what was reviewed and what was in the public hearing and what was voted on.
In fairness, I would say no, and they would say yes, that they did. And that's why I'm just saying, take a moment and look at the two, because it's really up to you to decide. You may disagree with me, and that's fine, that's really your...
I attended a public hearing, and I was there, and they went through what was going to be in the decision.
Yeah.
And it was the same thing in the decision as was discussed, and I would feel it was fair. Are you saying that what was discussed was different than what was in the zoning change?
So just in terms of the timeline, the public hearing ends, and then out comes the draft decision. So they don't get to comment on the draft decision. The board just votes on it at that point. So they're not notified by the draft decision, all these issues are at play. That has to come up beforehand. And what I'm saying to you is that there's a substantive difference between the two applications.
Mr. Oliveri, if in fact...
I didn't discern that in my review.
If the decision was, could an appeal be filed against the written decision that was subsequently voted on officially?
Well, that is the appeal. That's what's pending before you is the written decision, the May 12 written decision of the determination that was made on April 14th. Okay?
I was referring to the zoning change, not the planning board decision. I think Mr. McGill...
Again, the zoning change, I'm going to say there's nothing that comes before you on the zoning change.
Isn't Mr. McGill bringing that up? Or am
I think, well, that's a good point that you make, Mr. Burke. Is he really challenging the language of the zone change that was enacted by the town council? Isn't that really what you're arguing?
No, it's a good question, because I think it's a close point. I had to straighten this out in my own head. I'm saying that what the planning board had to do with it the first time around, it didn't have an opportunity to do, because it didn't have the language before it. The first time around, it was supposed to make a recommendation as to the zoning change.
Won't it have that language now when it goes to preliminary and final? And that's certainly...
Yes, but again...
Right, because they don't necessarily consider the parameters of what the council, they can't get into the council's head, they can only make a recommendation.
Right.
And they made a generic recommendation to provide basically relief on affordable housing, on GFA, and all of those specific to this project, because the council is the one who enacted special legislation related to this. This project, this land development.
I disagree, and I don't want to argue with Mr. Alberto as a solicitor. You can do this out in the parking lot, and you guys don't have to be part of it.
It's a great academic exercise.
But anyway, I wanted to clarify what my argument was, and clarify that I wasn't misleading you when I said that the public hearing had closed before these events happened, okay? It was reopened at a point in time, but it was reopened and closed again before these things happened. And I just wanted to clarify that for my argument. I'm not trying to twist or cloud things, just trying to make sure you understand what me and my clients are saying, so you can rule on it properly.
And I think that allow Mr. Tyson to